Before I start reviewing this game, I want to go over my past with it a bit. Tales of Symphonia was my first Tales game. When I was younger, I would go over to my friend's house, Jose and Adrian, who were two brothers. These guys I consider to this day to be some of my best friends. One day I went over to their house, and they had picked up a new game, which was Symphonia. At the time, I'd never seen anything like it. The action-based RPG combat, the cel-shaded graphics, the anime art style, it was all just so new and fresh to me. I sorely lamented that day for not yet owning a Gamecube. One day I eventually did, but unfortunately since I kept going over to their house to see more of it, I got spoiled on a few key plot twists. Regardless, I borrowed the game from them and I absolutely loved it. Eventually, I got my own copy, and since then, beating the game again for this review, this has been my 4th time beating the game. This game has a special place in my heart, and while I do think some fans praise it a bit too highly than what it actually deserves, this game still means a lot to me, and I hope to do it justice with this review.
It's Mondo Cool! That's right, boys. Mondo Cool.
Tales of Symphonia is an action RPG developed by the Tales studio and produced by Namco. If one were to say that the Tales series is the Final Fantasy of action RPGs, then Tales of Symphonia would be Final Fantasy VII in terms of its popularity and the effect it had on the series as a whole, particularly outside of Japan. The graphics in Tales of Symphonia are in a unique cel-shaded style. Now at the time, this was rarely seen before. The only other games I can think of that came out before this game that were also cel-shaded were Jet Grind Radio, Digital Devil Saga, and Zelda the Wind Waker. As such, the technology at the time for this sort of look was still fairly new, and also Namco didn't have the budget to make this game look quite as good as they may have wanted to. Thus, it does look a bit blocky and lacking in detail. However, this is quite understandable, and the game should definitely be given a pass on this end for being one of the first of its kind and being a first effort on the Tales Studios end for a cel-shaded game. If you're willing to look past this game's age, it has a generally welcoming look to it. It's simply bursting with vibrant colors, and even if in a technical sense the graphics don't look the best, they're still very charming and pleasing to the eye. Music in this game is your typical Motoi Sakuraba fare. In other words, there are a few tracks that stand out and sound really great, but the rest of the soundtrack tends to just blend into the background. Not one of his best, but by no means one of his worst or even a bad soundtrack. It actually does quite a good job of fitting well with the game. I have to say though, I particularly enjoyed this game's rendition of Fighting of the Spirit, which I think is one of the best songs in Tales period, and is a throwback to Tales of Fantasia, which is a very nice touch, especially for those who understand what that insinuates. It's especially a very nice treat for fans. The voice acting in this game is all around great. There are some really seasoned voice actors here. Cam Clark, Wendy Lee, Jennifer Hale, Tara Strong, Crispin Freeman, and Scott Menville. I mean, talk about a great cast, and it really shows, as the voice acting is top notch. Namco really went out of their way to get some talent for this game, and it pays off. The story in this game takes place in a world called Silveron. At first, the story seems a bit been there, done that. Our cast has to go on a journey, specifically one known as the Journey of World Regeneration. The worlds chosen must go on this journey in order to bring prosperity to Silveron. The world is running low on mana, which is the life source of the world. Completing the journey of regeneration will replenish the mana and subsequently make Silveron prosperous. As it turns out, the more you play the game, the more this is not what it appears to be. It does take some time for the story to start getting really good, but once it does, it never stops, and it becomes a very engaging tale with some twists you may not see coming. The story also has a theme of discrimination at its core, and it tries to analyze it in a way and speak out against it. It does so in a way that keeps it from being too preachy, but brings it up just enough to spark introspection and discussion. The cast of characters in this game are a lovable bunch, as you would expect from a Tales game. None of the characters really go through any development in the game, but I felt this was fine. It was definitely more about the story itself rather than the characters, but the characters themselves are still important to the story. and again, are a likable bunch. I have to say though, Lord Irving is probably one of my least favorite main characters for a Tales game. Emil from Tales of Symphonia 2 being my least favorite. He's not a bad lead by any means, but when you compare him to the likes of Yuri, Luke, or even Asbel, he's clearly not as interesting by comparison. He does a good job as the lead, and definitely has its moments, and I actually really like his fighting style of dual-wielding swords. But regardless, he is clearly one of the weaker leads in the Tales series. The rest of the characters, however, are pretty awesome. They're made all the better with the series staple, the skits. Now, the downside to these skits are that they aren't voiced, which is definitely a shame, but they're still very enjoyable. The Tales series has always been known for its combat, and Symphonia was the first one in the series to make the plunge into 3D. As such, the game serves as the blueprints for most of the Tales games released since then. However, this is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because a lot of what we've become familiar with in the combat started here. But there are some key features absent in this game. First and foremost, the free running mechanic was invented in Tales of the Abyss. That game also came up with mystic arts and even the use of overlimits. Well, technically there are overlimits, but they occur almost at random. They rarely actually play a role in the gameplay. Now, while the game doesn't have mystic arts specifically, it does make up for this somewhat by use of unison attacks. You have to fill up the meter above your character's stats during battle, and then press the Z button when you're near an enemy. When you do, you have to press all the corresponding buttons attached to each of the characters in order for them to perform their arts. Certain combinations of arts will add an extra attack at the end. It's a nice little trump card type of mechanic that can get you out of tough situations. Although figuring out what the right combinations are to get that extra attack at the end can be a little bit like finding a needle in a haystack. Something interesting about the combat in this game, however, is the lack of base and arcane arts. Instead, you have levels 1, 2, and 3 arts, so you can string together 3 arts altogether without requiring any additional skills like Super Chain. I think this is pretty neat, especially towards the end of the game when you start learning more arts. Outside of combat, the game has a decent amount of customization. First off, different titles you earn dictate your character's growth. This gives you an incentive to do side quests and also to do better in combat, so that you could possibly earn new titles. You also have the EX skill system. As you play through the game, you get different EX gems, which allow you to equip different skills, which range from running faster and increasing stats. Despite being an older game in the series, the combat is still fun and fast, and the customization has just enough depth to keep you interested. Tales of Symphonia is a damn fine game, and dare I say, the best RPG on the Gamecube. It hasn't aged gracefully in every area, but it's still a game worth going back to and playing. If you've never played a Tales game before, this isn't a bad place to start, as evidenced by how this game was a gateway for a lot of people into the series. While I do think the game is slightly overrated, I still love it, and highly recommend it regardless. It's simply a must for all fans of the Tales series. This has been Shintai, folks. Take it easy.